Rain hammered against the pavement as a frail, pregnant beggar struggled to steady herself beside the towering glass building. Her torn shawl clung to her soaked skin, her hands trembling as she shielded her swollen belly. People hurried past, pretending not to see until a furious man stormed out of the lobby. With a snarl twisting his face, he kicked her aside as if she were nothing more than trash blocking his path. She fell hard, gasping, clutching her stomach as pain shot through her body. The crowd froze. Some covered their mouths. Others stepped back. No one dared intervene. And the man Teboho walked away proudly, unaware that every second had been captured by the building's security cameras, and unaware that the woman he kicked was no ordinary beggar. She was the CEO's wife, in disguise. And tonight, his cruelty had awakened a storm he could never escape. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is right now. If you enjoy powerful moral stories like this, feel free to subscribe to the channel for more. Naledi had always been a woman of quiet strength, graceful, intelligent, and deeply compassionate. But as she sat, curled in the shadowed alley behind the glass building, wiping the rain from her bruised cheek, she felt a sting far worse than physical pain. The disguise she wore, a frayed dress, a patched shawl, and the artificial baby bump strapped to her stomach had never made her feel weaker. Until today, until the kick, until the humiliation that slammed into her ribs like a blow meant not just for her body, but for every vulnerable soul who had ever been trampled by cruelty. She inhaled shakily, running her fingers over the small audio device hidden beneath her shawl. It still worked. That mattered. That meant she could continue, because this wasn't just some reckless stunt. This mission was her last attempt to reveal what had been poisoning her husband's company from the inside. For weeks, rumors had reached Naledi's ears, quiet whispers about an employee extorting weaker staff members, manipulating vendors, and using threats to gain personal power. Her husband, Cabello, the CEO, had brushed it off as conflict exaggeration among employees. But Naledi sensed more. She knew when corruption took root, it did not stay quiet for long. It spread like a sickness, and someone needed to see it clearly. That someone, she believed, had to be her. She couldn't investigate openly. Workers tended to hide their true behavior when authority hovered nearby. So she transformed herself, leaving her elegant life behind, stepping into the skin of a woman the world often refused to see, a poor mother to be struggling on the streets. Her first day undercover had been uneventful. People walked past her without noticing. Some dropped coins, others ignored her entirely. But today, she had met him. Teboho. Even as she sat shivering, Naledi couldn't shake his face from her mind. The hard eyes, the curled lip, the entitlement dripping from his voice like poison. She had seen men like him before, men who were small on the inside and needed to hurt others to feel tall. But rarely had she encountered one who attacked a pregnant woman with such ease, as if her pain amused him, as if compassion was a burden he refused to carry. Naledi forced herself to sit upright. Her ribs throbbed sharply, but she swallowed the pain. She whispered to herself, steadying her resolve. This is exactly why I'm here. With slow, careful movements, she pushed herself to her feet. She could not stay in the alley long. Cameras around the building had surely captured the attack, but she needed more proof of his corruption, not just his cruelty. A single act of violence would expose his character. Yes, but exposing the rot inside Cabello's company required undeniable evidence. She stepped out of the alley and returned to her position near the building's edge. The rain had eased into a drizzle, and the sky glowed a faint gray as dawn crept closer. Workers filtered into the building, some sparing her sympathetic glances, others studying her with suspicion. But no one dared approach her after witnessing Teboho's fury. Naledi lowered her head, pretending to be weary, but her senses sharpened when she saw him again. Teboho strode toward the entrance, with the same arrogance as before. Straightening his tie, as if preparing to rule the world, he glanced at her briefly, a flicker of disdain crossing his face, but did not acknowledge her further. Instead, he walked over to a man waiting near the door. The man, dressed in vendor clothing, clutched an envelope nervously, glancing around as if afraid to be caught. Naledi narrowed her eyes. This looked exactly like what she had come to uncover. She shifted slightly, positioning herself behind a concrete pillar, where she could still listen without drawing attention. Her audio device captured every word as Teboho hissed at the vendor. "You're late," Teboho snapped. I'm sorry, sir," the vendor stammered. "The roads. I don't care about the roads. Do you have the rest of the money or not?" The vendor nodded quickly and handed over the envelope. Teboho snatched it, opened it, flipped through the contents, then gave a cold smirk. "Good. If you want your supply contract renewed, you'll continue paying. Understand?" "Yes, sir." "Thank you, sir," the vendor murmured. Bowing his head, Naledi felt a surge of triumph tightening her chest. She had him. She had the audio. She only needed more visual evidence, proof strong enough to bring to the board directly, but her ribs ached violently when she tried to shift position again. She winced, pressing a hand to her side. She could manage the pain, she told herself. She had endured worse. But she also knew this investigation wasn't going to be easy. If Teboho suspected her for even a moment, he could become even more dangerous. Hours passed. Naledi stayed near the building, observing everything who interacted with Teboho, who avoided him, who appeared intimidated. She saw a young female intern flinch whenever he walked by. She saw 2 employees whispering fearfully after a confrontation. She watched a janitor duck behind a cart to avoid being noticed. Every detail painted the same picture. Teboho ruled with fear. As the day dragged on, Naledi's body weakened. Hunger twisted her stomach. Exhaustion fogged her vision. Her side throbbed relentlessly from the violent kick earlier, but she refused to leave. She needed to understand the depth of this corruption before revealing herself. When the sun began to sink behind the skyscrapers, she finally stepped away to rest near a quiet park bench. She sat down slowly, the strain in her ribs nearly stealing her breath. Just as she closed her eyes, a voice spoke gently beside her. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Naledi's eyes snapped open. Standing in front of her was a tall man in his early 30s, dressed modestly but neatly. His expression was warm, his concern genuine, something rare, something she hadn't seen all day. She hesitated. "I'm fine," she whispered. Though her voice betrayed the lie, he frowned. "You don't look fine." She didn't answer. She couldn't risk exposing herself, but the man stepped closer, kneeling so he could look her in the eye. "My name is Thabiso. I saw earlier. That man kicked you. I tried to get through the crowd, but by the time I did, you had already moved." Naledi swallowed hard. So someone had cared. "I'm used to it," she murmured, trying to stay in character. But Thabiso shook his head firmly. "No one should ever be used to being treated like that, especially not someone in your condition." Her throat tightened. He believed the disguise completely. That meant it was working, but it also made guilt flicker through her heart. She hated deceiving someone so genuinely kind, yet she had no choice. "Not yet." Thabiso studied her face. "I know a safe place nearby where you can rest. I can take you there, at least until you feel steady on your feet." Naledi hesitated. She needed to stay close to the building. She needed to continue the investigation. But her ribs screamed for rest, and her mind clouded with pain. Before she could answer, she felt her vision blur. A wave of dizziness washed over her, and she gripped the bench to keep from falling. Thabiso quickly reached out, steadying her shoulders. "You're not okay," he said. "Let me help you, please." Naledi looked into his earnest eyes. In a world full of people who turned away from suffering, compassion like his was a rare gift. And right now, she needed that gift more than she wanted to admit. "Just for a moment," she whispered. Thabiso nodded, offering his arm. "Lean on me. There's Zever plays." She did. But even as she allowed herself to be helped, her mission remained sharp in her mind. Tomorrow, she promised herself, she would return. Tomorrow, She would continue shadowing Teboho. Tomorrow, the truth would come one step closer to the light. The morning sun had barely risen when Naledi found herself standing once again near the polished glass entrance of the building. Her ribs still ached from the kick, and each breath sent a sharp reminder of the cruelty she had endured. But nothing, not pain, not exhaustion, not fear would stop her from continuing the mission she had begun. She had rested only a few hours at the shelter Thabiso brought her to, insisting on leaving before dawn so she could return before Teboho arrived. She didn't want him to suspect she had received help. She needed him to believe she was helpless, invisible, powerless. People in power always revealed their true selves to those they believed could not fight back. Naledi adjusted her shawl, keeping her head lowered as office workers streamed into the building. Her bump felt heavier today, not because of the cloth and padding it was made of, but because of the weight of everything she now knew she had to expose. She replayed yesterday's scene in her mind, the violence, the arrogance, the shameless acceptance of bribes. It was infuriating, but she knew anger could not cloud her judgment. She needed clarity. She needed precision. She needed proof strong enough that even the most skeptical board member would not dare question it. Her audio recorder was hidden beneath the loose waistband of her skirt. It was fully charged. Her small hidden camera, pinned beneath a frayed fold of her shawl, was working too. She had tested it 3 times that morning. Every angle mattered. Every second counted. Just before the lobby doors slid open for the day's operations, a familiar sharp voice cut through the air like a blade. "You, again." Naledi's muscles stiffened, though she forced herself not to flinch. Teboho was approaching, swaggering toward her with the same confidence he wore like expensive cologne. He surveyed her with a sneer, the kind of look a man gives a stray dog that had wandered too close to his car. "I thought I told you to stay away from this building," he hissed. Naledi didn't respond at first. She kept her head bowed, hands gently cupping the fake bump. Responding too soon might provoke him. Silence, she knew, had its own power. It made cruel men nervous. Teboho clicked his tongue impatiently. "Useless woman. You people multiply like weeds, always begging, always filthy. You're ruining the view. Move." He nudged her shoulder with his foot, not a kick this time. More like a harsh command. But even that small contact made her bruised side throb. Naledi stepped aside slowly, playing the part of a weak, frightened woman, while her heart raced with fury. Some passers-by paused, staring. But just like yesterday, no one said a word. When she didn't respond quickly enough, Teboho leaned closer, his voice dropping to a low, venomous whisper. "If I see you here again tomorrow, I'll call security, and trust me, they do what I say." He straightened his expensive suit, shot her one last look of contempt, and walked inside. What he did not know was that the small tuft of fabric he had just brushed with his shoe hit a camera that captured his face, clearly anger. Lines, sneer, eyes filled with disdain. Another piece of evidence, another failure on his part to hide the monster within. Naledi exhaled slowly, relieved he was gone. Her ribs pulsed, but she ignored the sting and moved to a spot behind one of the decorative stone pillars near the parking area. That pillar gave her a clear view of an alleyway through which vendors frequently entered. Teboho, she had learned, preferred meeting his special connections away from the main lobby. An hour later, just as she predicted, a small delivery truck rolled in. A nervous-looking supplier stepped out, clutching yet another envelope. Naledi braced herself. She had to get closer this time, close enough to capture not just audio, but visual evidence too. She stumbled intentionally, dragging her feet toward the truck as if looking for a place to rest. The supplier glanced at her briefly, but then Teboho appeared from around the corner, waving him over impatiently. Naledi remained near the corner of the pillar, close enough for her hidden camera to record but far enough not to seem suspicious. "You're short this time," Teboho barked after tearing open the envelope. I had trouble collecting the funds, sir. The economy." "I don't care about the economy," Teboho snapped. "If you want your contract renewed for next quarter, you bring the full amount." No excuses. The vendor's hands shook visibly. I'll try my best, sir. No, you'll do it. Or find a new career. Naledi's stomach tightened. This was more than intimidation. It was extortion, and Teboho was comfortable, practiced, unafraid. A man doesn't become that bold unless he believes no one can touch him, but someone would. When the vendor left, Naledi tried shifting her weight to follow the man discreetly, but a sudden sharp pain shot through her ribs. She winced quietly, clutching her side. She couldn't afford to draw attention, so she remained where she was for now, trying to steady her breath. Minutes later, footsteps approached again. This time, they were slower, hesitant. "Are you all right?" a soft voice asked. Naledi lifted her eyes cautiously. It was the same young intern she had seen flinching yesterday, an anxious girl with gentle features, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a stack of files. "Ma'am, I saw what he did earlier," the intern whispered. "I'm sorry. He shouldn't treat anyone like that." The girl glanced nervously over her shoulder. Naledi realized instantly, this intern was one of Teboho's victims. Naledi remained in character and simply nodded weakly, allowing tears, real ones, to gather in her eyes. Her ribs hurt so badly she didn't need to pretend. The intern lowered her voice further. "Please be careful around him. He's dangerous, and he watches everyone." Naledi wanted to comfort her, to reveal who she truly was, but she forced herself to stay silent. Not yet. Protecting this girl meant gathering enough evidence to remove Teboho for good. Before the intern stepped away, she whispered one last trembling confession. "He ruined my life here. I wanted to quit yesterday, but I need this job." A wave of heartbreak washed over Naledi. This was the human cost of corruption: broken spirits, silenced voices, dreams crushed beneath the heel of a single cruel man. When the intern hurried off, Naledi remained still, feeling the weight of responsibility settle onto her shoulders like another layer of the disguise she wore. She could not fail. Too many people depended on the truth. Hours passed. The day grew hotter. Naledi's body begged for rest. She could not stay much longer, not without risking collapse. Her bruises throbbed relentlessly, and her fake bump felt heavier than ever. But just as she prepared to step away for the evening, something unexpected happened. Teboho returned angry, pacing, shouting into his phone, "I don't care who saw me. That beggar is nothing. And those interns, they'll stay silent if they know what's good for them." He paused, listening to whoever was on the other end, then snarled, "Don't lecture me about the CEO. The man doesn't even know what happens in his own company." Naledi's breath caught. So he truly believed he was untouchable. He shoved his phone into his pocket and stormed toward the parking lot, passing within arm's reach of her. She ducked her head deeper beneath her shawl. For a moment, it seemed he would ignore her, but then he stopped, turned, stared down at her with narrowed eyes. "You're still here," he muttered. His tone had changed, not dismissive but suspicious. Naledi's heartbeat hammered against her ribs. If he recognized anything, if he sensed she was not who she seemed, if he became violent again. But after a long, tense moment, he clicked his tongue and walked away. Naledi waited until he was completely gone before allowing herself to breathe. She had pushed her limits today. Her body trembled with fatigue and pain. She knew she had to leave, return at dawn to continue. But this time, she walked away with more than bruises. She walked away with proof. And soon, very soon, the man who believed himself invincible would collide with a truth he could not escape. Cabello had spent the entire morning pacing across the polished marble floor of his office, the steady rhythm of his footsteps echoing off the glass walls that framed the city skyline. Normally, he carried a calmness that grounded the entire company, a quiet but unmistakable authority. But today, worry gnawed at him, sharp and persistent. Something in the air felt wrong. A shift, a disturbance he couldn't quite name. For weeks, murmurs of misconduct had trickled into his ears, just fragments at first. A complaint filed, then mysteriously withdrawn. A vendor reluctant to speak. A junior employee leaving without explanation. It wasn't unusual for a large corporation to struggle with internal conflict. But these incidents shared a peculiar pattern: fear, anxious glances, stifled voices, and always around the same man, Teboho. Of all his employees, Teboho was the one Cabello understood the least. On paper, he was efficient, decisive, a fast riser. But Cabello had not forgotten the strange uneasiness he felt the first time they shook hands. There was an impatience beneath Teboho's smile, a flicker of arrogance in his eyes. Cabello had intended to keep a closer watch on him, but with multiple expansions underway and new partnerships demanding his attention, the subtle warning signs had slipped into the background. Naledi would never have let this happen. Just the thought of her made his heart tighten. She had left early that morning to visit her sister, or so he believed. She hadn't been herself lately, quiet, thoughtful, almost distant. He assumed she was tired, perhaps overwhelmed by her charity projects, and he had encouraged her to take a break. But now, in her absence, the company felt strangely colder, as if missing the soft heartbeat that kept everything human. He reached for his phone, contemplating calling her again, but a knock at the door interrupted him. His assistant, a middle-aged man named Ditiro, stepped inside with a hesitant expression. "Sir, we've received another anonymous employee report." Cabello's brow furrowed. "Another one?" "Yes, sir." Ditiro handed over a thin folder. "It concerns intimidation, bribery, workplace threats, all allegedly tied to the same individual." He won. Cabello opened the folder slowly. The handwriting was shaky but clear enough to reveal desperation. The writer claimed they could not reveal their identity for fear of retaliation. They described being threatened, pressured into unethical decisions, and warned not to speak about it. The letter ended with a chilling sentence: "He believes he cannot be touched." Cabello closed the folder with a soft but deliberate thud. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "Have you confirmed whether the writer is still employed with us?" "We're not sure," Ditiro replied. "They may have resigned shortly after sending it." Cabello exhaled sharply, frustration tightening his jaw. "Why didn't anyone bring this to me sooner?" We tried, sir," Ditiro admitted. "But the reports never came with evidence, and with everything going on the last few months, it became difficult to verify anything." "Evidence," Cabello repeated under his breath. "That's what we're missing." Yet something in his gut told him that evidence existed. Someone, somewhere, had seen something, and the uneasy whispers about Teboho were too consistent to dismiss. Before he could speak again, another knock came, this time brisk, urgent. A security officer stepped in. "Sir, I think you'll want to see this." Cabello's pulse quickened. The officer handed him a tablet, already cued to a paused frame of security footage. The image showed the entrance of the building, blurry but unmistakable. A woman in ragged clothing, clutching her pregnant belly, sitting near the doorway. "Play it," Cabello said, voice steady but tense. The video began, and within seconds, Cabello felt his blood turn cold. There was Teboho storming out of the building with fury carved into his features. He shouted something, though the camera had no audio. The woman recoiled, raising an arm protectively over her bump. Then Teboho kicked her, sending her tumbling sideways onto the pavement. Cabello's jaw tightened so hard it hurt. He leaned closer, unable to tear his eyes from the screen. The woman lay there, shaking, and Teboho just walked away, unbothered, unhurried. The officer continued talking. "We received this footage anonymously. Sir, it was recorded yesterday. The woman hasn't returned to ask for help, and we haven't located her." Cabello rewound the clip, watched it again, and again. The image burned itself into his mind. A pregnant woman, a helpless woman, attacked in broad daylight, at his company's doorstep. "That man," Cabello said through clenched teeth. "He will answer for this." "Yes, sir," the security officer replied. "But we need to find the woman first. She could be seriously injured." Cabello nodded. "Send a team. Search the area, and discreetly. I don't want Teboho alerted, not until we know everything." Yes, sir. As the officer left, Detiro cleared his throat. Sir, what would you like to do about Tiboho in the meantime? Suspend him. Cabello shook his head slowly. Not yet. If he's involved in bribery or corruption, we need to catch him in the act. Without solid proof, he might slip away. And I won't let someone like that evade responsibility. Detiro nodded, though worry marked his face. Understood. Cabello set the tablet down but did not step away from it. His eyes drifted to the still frame of the woman lying on the ground. Something about her felt familiar. The way she held her belly, the posture, even the curve of her cheek beneath the shadows. But no, he quickly dismissed the thought. His wife would never disguise herself like that. She was careful, thoughtful, and far too sensible to put herself in dangerous situations. Still, unease twisted in his stomach. He needed to find her, and he needed to know what she thought about all this. Her perspective always sharpened his judgment. He reached for his phone to call her again, but at the last second, he froze. No answer. Again, something was very wrong. He tried to focus, pushing aside personal fears. He had a responsibility to the employees who trusted him, to the company he built, and to the woman in the footage whose pain and fear haunted him. He opened the folder with anonymous complaints again. The pieces were connecting now. Fear, intimidation, extortion, and now violence. The storm brewing inside Cabello settled into something colder, sharper, resolved. He straightened his suit coat, walked to the window, and looked down at the city spreading beneath him. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet but filled with steel. Find her, he said to himself. Whoever she is, she will not suffer alone. Outside, the afternoon clouds gathered heavy, dark, threatening rain. Inside, Cabello made his decision. The investigation would begin in full. And the truth, whatever it cost, would no longer be ignored. Naledi woke before sunrise, her body aching from the bruises that had darkened across her ribs. But her spirit sharpened with renewed determination. She had slept little, resting only enough to steady her breath because the images of the previous day kept flashing in her mind. Tiboho's sneer, the vendor's trembling hands, the intern's whispered fear. Each face reminded her of what she needed to uncover. Each memory strengthened her resolve. She tightened the straps of her artificial bump and wrapped her shawl around her shoulders, wincing as the fabric brushed her bruises. Thabiso had insisted she remain at the shelter for at least another day, but Naledi had thanked him gently and left before dawn. She appreciated his kindness, but kindness could not stop corruption. Kindness could not expose people like Tiboho. Evidence could, truth could. And that truth needed to be revealed soon, before more people were harmed. As she approached the company grounds, the early light cast a soft glow across the tall glass building. The morning workers arrived in steady streams, their chatter rising and falling in waves. None of them recognized the woman standing quietly by the stone pillar. To them, she was simply another face of poverty, one easily ignored. But Naledi's eyes were sharp, observant, and ready. Today, she had a plan. It had taken shape the night before. While she lay on a thin mattress in the shelter, she mentally replayed everything she'd seen and heard, every detail, every pattern. If she wanted evidence strong enough to expose Tiboho thoroughly, she needed not only the audio recordings but also a visual timeline of his actions. She needed to capture how he interacted with his contracts, who approached him, who avoided him when deliveries came, and how he reacted when frustrated. Arnold, the security guard who quietly disliked Tiboho, had once mentioned to her in passing during a charity event that the building's side alley was rarely monitored. That was where certain employees conducted their less official business. And judging by Tiboho's behavior, Naledi suspected he preferred that exact spot, so she positioned herself where she could observe the alley clearly, while still appearing as an exhausted beggar seeking shelter. The hours stretched slowly. Cars pulled into the lot, employees hurried to the entrance, and vendors rolled in carts of supplies. But Naledi remained steady, her attention honed on the flow of people entering the alley. Her ribs throbbed, and her hands grew stiff from the cold air. But she forced herself to ignore the discomfort. Just before mid-morning, she spotted him. Thibaut walked briskly across the pavement, checking his watch. Irritated even in his stride, he glanced around the alley with a hardened expression, an expression of someone expecting something, or someone. He pulled out his phone and dialed quickly. "Yes, I'm here," he snapped. "You're late." A pause. "Well, hurry up. I don't have all day." Naledi shifted her weight, adjusting the angle of her hidden camera beneath her shawl. She needed to capture his face, his movements, his interactions. Every fragment of proof mattered. Her heart quickened when a small cargo van rounded the corner and slowed near the alley entrance. A man stepped out. Not the same vendor from yesterday, but another with the same nervous posture, the same darting eyes. He clutched a brown envelope, thick and folded at the edges from being held too tightly. "Perfect," Naledi whispered silently. She leaned forward slightly, pretending to adjust her sitting position, but keeping her camera steady. Her ribs protested, but she swallowed the pain. The vendor walked toward Thibaut cautiously. "Good morning, sir," he said, bowing his head slightly. "You're late," Thibaut repeated sharply. There were some delays with the stock." "I didn't ask about your excuses," Thibaut snapped. "Do you have the payment?" The vendor nodded and extended the envelope. Thibaut snatched it aggressively, tore it open, and thumbed through the stack of notes inside. The corner of his mouth twitched upward in approval. "This is more like it," he muttered. The vendor swallowed hard. "Will the renewal? We'll discuss that next week." Thibaut interrupted with a dismissive wave. "Bring the rest of the payment then." "But sir, this is everything we—" Thibaut's head snapped up. His glare was cold, dangerous. "Are you questioning me?" he growled. "No, sir," the vendor stammered. "I wasn't. Good. Because I'm not interested in what you can't do. I'm only interested in what you can pay." The man nodded quickly, backing away. His hands shook so visibly that Naledi felt a twist of sympathy tighten in her chest. People like him didn't have the luxury to resist. They were trapped in a system where a single man's corruption could destroy an entire livelihood. As soon as the vendor was gone, Thibaut tucked the envelope into his suit jacket and looked around. His eyes skimmed over Naledi without recognition, without guilt, without even a flicker of human remorse. To him, she was still nothing. He disappeared into the building, the sound of his harsh footsteps echoing off the alley walls. Naledi exhaled slowly. Her hands trembled not from fear, but from triumph. She had captured the exchange, the bribe, the threat, everything. But the day was far from over. Around midday, another woman approached her, a cleaner in uniform, dragging a heavy supply cart. She paused when she noticed Naledi wincing and clutching her ribs. "Ma'am, are you okay?" the woman asked gently. Naledi lifted her eyes, studying her. The cleaner's expression was sincere, her posture kind. Naledi offered a strained smile. "I hurt myself," Naledi murmured softly, "but I will manage." The cleaner hesitated before lowering her voice. "If it was because of him, the man in the suit, I'm sorry you had to meet someone like that. So more people knew. More people feared him. Does he treat others badly too?" Naledi whispered. The cleaner nodded, glancing around cautiously. "Everyone. If he finds you alone, he insults you. Sometimes worse, the interns cry in the bathrooms. The vendors avoid coming unless they have to. We're all scared of him." Naledi forced herself to maintain her disguise, though her heart ached for the woman. "Why doesn't anyone report him?" "We tried," the cleaner whispered, "but he always finds out, and then things get worse." Naledi lowered her gaze, her mind already shaping the narrative she would present to the board when the time came. The pattern was undeniable. The corruption wasn't hidden, it was embedded. It had festered quietly, feeding on the fear of those who had no power to defend themselves. As the afternoon unfolded, Naledi observed two more interactions, both confirming her suspicions. A delivery driver dropped off supplies but refused to step out of his truck until he was sure Thibaut wasn't around. A receptionist quickly changed direction in the hallway when she glimpsed him through the glass window. Power abused becomes a weapon of silence. Naledi saw it clearly now. When the sky began to dim and employees started leaving for the day, Naledi finally stood. Her legs trembled from hours of crouching and sitting still. Her ribs pulsed with deep, angry bruises. Her throat felt tight from holding back both pain and emotion. But she had what she needed. Audio recordings, camera footage, testimonies informal, yes, but powerful, and the certainty that Tibaho's downfall was not just necessary, but inevitable. As she walked away from the building, the artificial bump heavy against her abdomen, she whispered to herself, "Tomorrow, the truth moves closer." Naledi did not know that. At that same moment, her husband was in his office watching the footage of her being kicked, rewinding it again and again, his heart pounding with horror at the sight of a pregnant woman collapsing to the ground. He didn't know it was her, not yet. But the storm was building, and once it broke, no one, least of all Tibaho, would be ready. By the time dawn washed a pale gold over the city, Naledi was already in position near the company building, her posture slightly hunched, one hand instinctively resting against the artificial bump strapped beneath her clothes. Her ribs throbbed each breath, sending sparks of pain across her side, but the fire inside her burned stronger. She had proof, but she needed a pattern. A full picture, enough to expose not only the corruption, but the cruelty festering beneath it. Today, she expected Tibaho to grow bolder. Men like him always did after a victory, real or imagined. Yesterday, he had received multiple envelopes, delivered threats, and humiliated people without consequence. Men who saw no resistance, believed themselves invincible. And invincible men made mistakes. Naledi was counting on that. She shifted her weight near the stone pillar at the edge of the parking lot. Cars streamed in steadily. Some employees glanced at her pityingly. Others froze in discomfort when they recognized her as the same pregnant beggar Tibaho had kicked. A few whispered to each other, their faces tight with worry. The company was a hive of quiet rumors. Now fear circulated as quickly as gossip. Then she saw him. Tibaho emerged from his black sedan, as if stepping onto a stage. He straightened his expensive suit, adjusted the cuffs, and smoothed the front of his jacket with a flourish that screamed arrogance. He carried himself like a man who believed the world owed him reverence. The moment his gaze swept across the entrance, shoulders stiffened, conversations halted. Several employees made quick detours around him, their eyes lowered. He thrived on it. His gaze eventually landed on Naledi. A slow smirk spread across his face, an expression of triumph, irritation, and amusement all tangled together. "You again," he said coldly as he approached. Naledi lowered her head, allowing her shawl to obscure part of her face. She needed him, loud today, angry, unrestrained. The camera nestled beneath her shawl remained pointed directly at him. Tibaho stopped in front of her, arms crossed. "Didn't I tell you to stay away from this building?" he snapped. She didn't answer. Her silence infuriated him instantly. "Are you deaf?" he barked. "I said, get out of here." He took a threatening step forward, raising his foot slightly, a gesture meant to intimidate, not necessarily strike. But Naledi flinched automatically. The pain in her ribs made her movement genuine, raw. And once again, the cruel spark flashed in his eyes. That was what he wanted. He lowered his foot but leaned forward so close she felt his breath. "If you show up tomorrow, I'll make sure security drags you away." She trembled visibly. Not all of it was acting. Satisfied with her fear, he straightened and brushed invisible dust from his suit sleeve. "Pathetic," he muttered before turning away. Naledi's hidden camera had captured everything, his expression, his tone, the threatening gesture. She remained still until he entered the building, then slowly shifted to ease the pain shooting across her torso. But the day's drama was only beginning. The first vendor arrived around mid-morning. Naledi recognized him as one of the smaller suppliers, a timid man with a hunched posture and a badly worn jacket. He lingered near the alley entrance, glancing around nervously, as if waiting for a signal. Tibaho appeared minutes later. Naledi's camera activated instantly, recording the scene as he approached the vendor with a predatory confidence. "You're late," he said sharply for the third day in a row. "No, sir," the vendor stuttered. I came at the usual time." "Don't argue with me." Tiboho extended his hand. "Do you have it?" The vendor reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. His fingers trembling. "This is the last I can offer, sir. Please. Business has been slow. I can't keep paying like this." A cruel smile stretched across Tiboho's lips. "Oh, you'll keep paying," he said coolly. "Unless you want someone else handling deliveries next month. Someone more cooperative. But sir, enough," Tiboho snapped. He stepped forward, grabbing the vendor by the collar of his jacket so suddenly that the man gasped. Several employees walking nearby froze, staring with wide eyes, but none approached. Not one spoke. "That's what happens when you try to negotiate with me," Tiboho said, his voice low and venomous. "Next time, bring the amount I told you. Or you're finished." He shoved the man backward. The vendor stumbled, nearly falling. Shame and fear flickered across his face as he straightened, eyes glistening. He mumbled something like an apology and hurried to his van. Naledi's heart clenched painfully, but she did not move. She needed the footage. When the vendor finally drove away, Tiboho exhaled with satisfaction, loosening his collar before walking into the building. But another drama waited inside. From her vantage point, Naledi could see through one of the large ground floor windows. A young intern, thin, anxious, probably no more than 22, was carrying coffee trays when she saw Tiboho approaching. Her hands trembled instantly, causing one cup to teeter dangerously. "Watch it," Tiboho snapped as he passed her. I'm sorry, sir," she whispered. He stopped, turned, looked at her with icy displeasure. "Are you incapable of doing anything right?" he said loudly enough for nearby workers to hear. "I didn't spill anything," she whispered desperately. "You almost did, and I don't tolerate incompetence." Tears welled in her eyes, but she nodded stiffly and scurried away. The room continued moving around them, but the tension remained thick, palpable. People pretended not to see, but everyone saw. Naledi swallowed hard. How many people had this man broken? How many careers had been derailed because they dared to be human near him? Her hands balled into fists beneath her shawl. Just then, the young intern slipped outside through the side door, her face blotchy, her breathing shallow. Naledi watched her pace anxiously behind the pillar, trying to regain control. Finally, the intern sank to the ground and covered her face with both hands. Naledi's instincts tugged at her. She wanted to comfort the girl. She wanted to reveal who she truly was, that she wasn't helpless, that she wasn't actually pregnant, that she was going to expose him and make sure the girl would never fear him again. But she couldn't, not yet. Every truth had its time. And this truth needed to wait. Instead, she whispered softly, "Are you all right, child?" The intern lowered her hands, startled. She looked at Naledi first with confusion, then pity. "I'm fine," she whispered unconvincingly. Naledi tilted her head. "You don't look fine." The intern hesitated, then sighed. He scares everyone. You should stay away from him. It's not safe." Naledi nodded gently. "I know." The intern blinked, surprised by the response, as if sensing something deeper she couldn't place. But she said nothing else. She stood shakily and walked back inside. When she disappeared, Naledi exhaled shakily. Her mission felt heavier than ever. By late afternoon, the corruption deepened. A second vendor arrived, this one looking furious rather than scared. Naledi prepared her recorder. "I'm not paying again," the vendor shouted the moment Tiboho appeared. "You said last month was the last time." Naledi froze. An outburst like this was dangerous. Brave, but dangerous. Tiboho strode up to him, slowly, deliberately, too calm. "You're raising your voice," Tiboho said quietly. "At me. I won't pay another cent," the vendor hissed. "This is extortion." Tiboho's smile returned, a cold, cruel smile. Naledi had already learned to fear. "Then, consider your contract terminated." "You can't do that." "I just did," Tiboho said with a shrug. "And I'll make sure no other supplier in this district hires you once I'm done." The vendor's face collapsed in devastation. Teboho turned away without remorse. Naledi felt her stomach twist. If she hesitated any longer, this would continue. People would keep suffering. But tomorrow would change everything. Because tonight, Naledi would review all her evidence. And in the morning, she would set the trap that would bring Teboho down for good. The night had been long for Naledi. She barely slept, her bruised ribs throbbing with every shift on the thin mattress. But pain was no match for purpose. When the first hint of dawn touched the sky, she pushed herself upright with a quiet groan, steadying her breath as she prepared for another day of deception, observation, and quiet endurance. The stakes were higher now. The evidence she had gathered was solid, but she needed more. Enough to crush not only Teboho's facade, but the entire corrupt structure he'd built from fear. As she stepped back into the cold morning air, her legs trembled slightly under her. She drew her shawl tighter around her body, adjusted the artificial bump, and walked toward the building with slow, deliberate steps. The city felt different today, quieter, as if anticipating something. Or perhaps it was Naledi who had changed. Her resolve had sharpened overnight, crystallizing into something fierce and unshakable. But her body was reaching its breaking point. When she arrived at the company grounds, she chose a shaded corner near the alleyway. Her plan was simple but dangerous. She would continue the surveillance, no matter the toll on her body. She could endure pain, she could endure fear, but she could not endure the thought of failing the people suffering under Teboho's reign. She clutched her side discreetly, hiding a grimace as she lowered herself onto the pavement. She hoped, silently, that today her bruises would not force her into collapse, but fate had a different plan for the morning. Barely an hour had passed when her vision blurred unexpectedly. She exhaled sharply and blinked several times, trying to steady herself. The world around her swayed, colors dulling into washed-out shapes. A wave of dizziness rolled through her so intensely that she instinctively reached out to steady herself against the pillar. "Are you all right?" The voice broke through her fog, a familiar voice, filled with gentle concern rather than fear or cruelty. Naledi looked up. Thabiso stood before her, holding a small bag of bread and fruit. His expression shifted immediately from calm to alarm as he saw the pallor of her face. "You're worse than yesterday," he said softly, kneeling beside her. "Why are you out here again?" Naledi forced a faint smile. "I need to be here. You need to rest," he replied firmly. "You look like you're about to collapse." She said nothing, trying to hide another wince, but Thabiso saw through it easily. His eyes softened with worry mixed with frustration. Frustration not at her, but at whoever had placed her in this situation. He held out a hand. "Please, come with me. You can rest for a moment." "I can't," she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of truth she couldn't share. "If I leave now, I might miss something important." "You'll miss something far more important if you pass out on the ground," he said. "Your health matters." Naledi swallowed. She wished she could tell him everything who she truly was, what she was fighting for, why she had to endure this. But revealing her identity now could compromise the entire investigation. She needed him to trust her without knowing the full picture. But she also needed a moment to breathe. "Just for a moment," she said softly. Thabiso nodded and helped her to her feet. His touch was careful, respectful, supporting her weight without making her feel weak. He guided her to a bench beneath a tree at the edge of the parking lot. Partially hidden from view but still close enough for her to watch the alleyway, she lowered herself onto the bench with a painful inhale. Thabiso sat beside her, offering the small bag he'd brought. "You should eat something," he said. Naledi hesitated. She wasn't hungry, but the dizziness hadn't fully passed. She took a piece of bread and broke off a small bite. The simple nourishment steadied her slightly. Thabiso watched her silently for a moment, then spoke. "I've seen you here for days now. You're not like the others. You observe too much." Naledi's breath caught. "What do you mean?" "You don't beg like someone who's desperate," he said thoughtfully. "You watch people. You listen. And you're always near the same places." A flicker of alarm surged through her, but Thabiso shook his head quickly. "I'm not accusing you of anything," he added gently. I want to understand why someone like you is out here, pretending to be helpless." Naledi's heart thrummed in her chest. The moment she had hoped to postpone had arrived earlier than expected. She met his gaze. His eyes were earnest, warm, filled with compassion but also curiosity. He deserved the truth, at least part of it. Taking a deep breath, Naledi leaned closer and lowered her voice. "I'm not who you think I am," she whispered. "I'm not homeless, and I'm not pregnant." Thabiso blinked, stunned. "Then why?" "I'm investigating something," she interrupted softly. "Something dangerous. Something that affects a lot of people." "Dangerous," Thabiso's voice dropped. "Does it involve that man who kicked you?" Naledi nodded slowly. Thabiso clenched his jaw. "I knew it," he muttered. "I've seen him do things, intimidate people, threaten vendors, bully staff. Everyone is afraid of him, but no one dares report him." "You've witnessed these things?" Naledi asked, her breath tightening with urgency. He nodded. "I used to work here, years ago, not as an employee, just a temp contractor. But I saw enough to know he enjoys hurting people who can't fight back, and he never gets caught." Naledi felt a quiet click in her mind, as if a missing puzzle piece had fallen into place. Thabiso's testimony wasn't just useful, it was critical. "Can you help me?" she asked softly. Thabiso hesitated only a moment before nodding firmly. "Yes," he said. "Whatever you need." Naledi exhaled, relief warming her chest. "Thank you. But you must be careful. If he suspects anything, he might come after you." Thabiso's eyes hardened. "Let him try." She almost smiled at the fierce loyalty in his voice. But before she could say more, footsteps echoed from across the lot, heavy, purposeful, familiar. Naledi and Thabiso both turned. Teboho. He was striding toward the alleyway, his jaw tight, his movements sharp with irritation. He pulled out his phone and began speaking angrily into it. "Yes, I told you already, bring the money today, or don't bother renewing the contract." Naledi tensed. This was her chance. She rose slowly from the bench. Thabiso reached out instinctively. "Wait. You can't go near him right now. You're still weak." "I have to," Naledi whispered. "This is why I'm here." She stepped away before he could stop her, adjusting her shawl to ensure the camera captured everything clearly. Her ribs screamed in protest with each step, but she forced herself forward. Pain was nothing compared to what she needed to accomplish. She positioned herself behind a pillar not close enough to be noticed, but close enough to record. A vendor approached. Another afraid man. Another envelope. Teboho's voice rose, sharp, venomous. "This is short," he said. "It's all I have," the vendor pleaded. "Then you have nothing," Teboho snapped. "Bring the full amount next time or your business dies." Naledi's heart pounded. She needed this. She needed one final push of evidence. But suddenly, without warning, a sharp dizziness washed over her again. Her vision flickered. Her knees weakened. "No, not now. Please, not now." She tried to hold herself steady against the pillar, but her legs buckled beneath her. A gasp escaped her lips as she began to collapse, her camera tilting. Just before her body hit the ground, an arm caught her strong, steady, and familiar. Thabiso. He held her upright, his face pale with alarm. "You can't keep doing this," he whispered urgently. "You'll kill yourself." Naledi's breaths came ragged and shallow. Her vision blurred again. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked. "I need just a little more." "No," Thabiso said firmly. "You're done for today. Here." She didn't have the strength to resist, as he lifted her gently into his arms and carried her away from the alley, away from danger, away from Teboho's eyes. As she drifted toward unconsciousness, only one thought remained clear in her mind. Tomorrow, the trap would be set. Tomorrow, the downfall would begin. Naledi awoke to the faint scent of antiseptic and the soft rustle of fabric. For a moment, her senses blurred. She couldn't tell where she was or how she'd gotten there. All she knew was that her ribs felt like they had been struck by iron rods, and each breath came with a sharp tremor of pain. When she opened her eyes fully, she found herself lying on a narrow cot inside a small community clinic. Sunlight streamed gently through the thin curtains, casting faint patterns across the room, and beside her sat Thabiso. He was leaning forward, elbows on his knees, staring down at his clasped hands. The worry etched into his face made him look older, more worn than the day before. When he heard Naledi stir, he lifted his head instantly. "You're awake," he breathed, relief flooding his expression. Naledi tried to sit up, but pain shot through her side, forcing her back down with a sharp gasp. "Easy," Thabiso said, gently placing a steadying hand near her shoulder. "You fainted. You nearly hit your head on the pavement. I brought you here." Her memory returned in fragments: Tibaho's threats, the vendor's desperation, her dizziness, the ground tilting beneath her, and then Thabiso's arms catching her just before she fell. She closed her eyes briefly. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." "You didn't cause trouble," Thabiso replied softly. "You're hurt, badly. Your ribs are bruised, maybe fractured. You shouldn't be moving around." His voice carried a mixture of frustration and compassion, as though he didn't know whether to scold her or comfort her. Naledi exhaled shakily. "I have to move around. I have work to do." Thabiso shook his head. "Not today. Not like this." Naledi studied him quietly. Seeing the depth of his concern, few people had ever looked at her that way, with no ulterior motive, just genuine care. But care was a luxury she couldn't indulge in. Not now, not when so many people's futures depended on exposing Tibaho. After a moment of silence, Thabiso asked gently, "Who are you really?" The question hung between them, heavy, necessary, impossible to avoid. Naledi took a slow breath, choosing her words carefully. The truth mattered now. Thabiso had risked much already. He deserved more than half answers. "My name is Naledi," she began softly. "But that's not the part that matters." "Then what does?" he asked, leaning closer. "I'm not homeless, and I'm not pregnant." Her hand brushed lightly over the artificial bump. "This is part of an investigation I'm conducting." Thabiso's eyes widened. "Investigation? Into him?" Naledi nodded. "Yes, I've been trying to gather evidence of his corruption, his abuse of power, his threats, the extortion. I needed to see how he behaves when he thinks no one important is watching. So you pretended to be." He struggled to finish the sentence. "A vulnerable person," Naledi supplied gently. "Someone he wouldn't hesitate to mistreat. Someone he would show his true self to." The realization hit Thabiso with a force that made him lean back slightly. "He kicked you," he said slowly. "He kicked you because he thought you were nothing." Naledi's gaze darkened, but her voice remained calm. "Yes, and that's exactly what I needed to see." Thabiso stared at her for several seconds, the weight of her words settling heavily between them. Then, unexpectedly, he let out a low, humorless laugh full of disbelief and outrage. "You're braver than anyone I've met," he said, "or more stubborn." "Both," she admitted with a faint smile, but the smile faded quickly, as her mind drifted back to what still needed to be done. "I'm close," she whispered. "I almost have enough evidence to expose him." "Almost," Thabiso repeated sharply. "After everything you've recorded, everything you've witnessed, you think you need more, Naledi. You could barely stand yesterday." "I know," she said softly. "But the board will not act on insinuations. They need something undeniable, something even Tibaho cannot twist. One last piece. One final recording that captures the scale of what he's doing." Thabiso sighed deeply, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "And you're planning to get that? In your condition?" Naledi didn't answer directly. Instead, she shifted slowly, ignoring the jolt of pain that followed, and asked, "How long have I been here?" "Just a few hours," he replied. "The doctor said you need rest, but your injuries aren't life-threatening. If you push yourself again, though, it could get worse." Naledi lowered her gaze. "I don't have much time." "Time for what?" Thabiso pressed. She hesitated. To stop him before he destroys more people, she said quietly. Before he harms someone who can't recover. Thabiso looked at her for a long moment, the tension in his jaw softening. Finally, he spoke. Then I'm helping you. Naledi blinked, startled. Thabiso, I can't ask you to. You're not asking, he interrupted gently. I'm offering. Her eyes softened. It's dangerous. I know, he said. But watching him walk around hurting innocent people is worse. If I can help stop him, even a little, then I will. Emotion tightened Naledi's throat. This man who barely knew her, who owed her nothing, was willing to risk himself for a cause he wasn't even part of. That kind of integrity was rare, priceless. You're a good man, she whispered. Thabiso shrugged lightly. Just a man who's tired of seeing injustice. They were silent for a moment, until Naledi pushed herself upright again. Pain flared across her ribs, but she steadied herself. We need to plan, she said quietly. Teboho is getting bolder. He thinks he's untouchable. That arrogance will be his downfall. What do you need me to do? Thabiso asked. Naledi thought for a moment, her mind piecing together the next steps. Tomorrow, he's expecting a large payment from one of the suppliers, a bigger envelope than usual. If we can capture that entire exchange audio, video, the threat that always follows it will be undeniable. And you want me to record it? Thabiso asked. Yes, she said. I can't get close enough without him recognizing me now. He's already suspicious, but you're unknown to him. Thabiso considered it, then nodded. I can do that, but there's more, Naledi added quietly. We need to lure him into a position where he exposes his full scheme, his list of bribe takers, his threats against employees, his control over suppliers. Everything. Thabiso frowned. How do we do that? Naledi hesitated. We set a trap, she said finally, one he can't resist walking into. How? We make him believe his corruption is at risk, she whispered, that someone he trusts has betrayed him. That will push him into revealing everything while trying to protect himself. Thabiso's eyebrows rose slowly. That's risky. He could become violent. Naledi's expression hardened. He already is violent. Thabiso exhaled deeply. All right, tell me what to do. She looked at him with gratitude and something else, something like trust. Tonight, she said, we prepare. But despite her resolve, as she lay back against the pillow, her vision flickered again. She tried to focus, but exhaustion dragged at her like a weight pulling her under. Thabiso noticed instantly. You need to rest. We can plan when you wake up. Naledi nodded weakly. Just a few minutes. Take as long as you need, he said softly, as sleep pulled her under once more. The last thing she heard was Thabiso's steady, resolute promise. You won't fight this alone. And for the first time since her investigation began, Naledi allowed herself to believe it. Night settled over the city like a heavy cloak, draping the streets in long shadows and muted colors. But for Naledi, sleep came only in pieces, broken fragments of rest that vanished each time. The throbbing in her ribs flared, or the memory of Teboho's cruelty replayed in her mind. She lay in the cot, staring at the faint outline of the ceiling, waiting for dawn, waiting for the moment everything would begin. The plan she and Thabiso had crafted was bold, dangerous, and dependent on precision. But it was necessary. Teboho was too cautious to confess openly unless he believed someone close to him had betrayed his secrets. Arrogant men with something to hide became predictable under pressure. They talked too much. They exposed themselves with the very confidence that once protected them. Just before sunrise, she pushed herself upright. Ignoring the sharp stab of pain near her ribs, she wrapped her shawl around her again and secured the artificial bump. Her hands trembled, but not from fear. Determination vibrated through her with every breath. Today the trap would be set. When Naledi stepped outside the clinic, Thabiso was already waiting. He wore a plain, dark jacket, his expression steady but tense. In his hand, he held a small recording device, one Naledi had given him the night before. You don't have to do this, Naledi said softly. though she knew he would refuse the offer to step back. "You know I'm going to anyway," he replied with a faint smile. "Besides, we're in this together now." Naledi nodded once. She didn't have the strength to argue, nor the heart to deny his willingness to help. They walked together toward the company building. The streets were nearly empty, the early morning air cool and still. As they neared the tall glass doors, Naledi veered off toward her usual position near the stone pillar, far enough not to draw attention, close enough to observe everything. She sank onto the pavement with a soft grunt, steadying her breathing. Every movement felt heavier today. Every bruise felt deeper, but her eyes remained sharp as they followed Tabiso's retreating figure toward the alleyway. The trap depended on 3 parts. First, a forged message constructed by Naledi late the night before, sent to Teboho from an untraceable number. The message read, "We need to talk. Someone is collecting evidence against you. Meet me in the alley, alone." Second, a staged conversation. Tabiso would pretend to be a frightened supplier, desperate to avoid being implicated. His goal was to provoke Teboho into revealing more about his schemes, names, threats, previous bribes, anything. Third, Naledi's recording equipment. She would capture the confrontation from a distance, ensuring both audio and video were documented. Every piece had to work. If even one faltered, everything would collapse. As she waited, Naledi's fingers brushed the edge of her shawl, ensuring the tiny lens beneath remained pointed at the alleyway. She winced again as a sharp pain lanced through her ribs. Sweat prickled her forehead. She forced herself to breathe evenly. She could endure this. She had endured worse. Footsteps approached the unmistakable stride of someone walking fast, fueled by suspicion, annoyance, and a bruised ego. Teboho. He entered the alley with a heavy scowl, scanning the shadows. "Where are you?" he growled. Tabiso stepped forward cautiously, hunched and nervous, exactly as planned. Naledi's breath caught as she watched him play the part with unsettling accuracy. "Sir, I'm sorry to contact you this way," Tabiso said, voice trembling, "but I needed to warn you." Teboho narrowed his eyes, stepping closer. "Who are you?" "A supplier," Tabiso replied. "I can't say which one, but I heard something yesterday." "A rumor," Teboho stiffened. "What rumor?" "Wills. That someone is gathering proof against you," Tabiso whispered. "Real proof, enough to expose everything." For a split second, Teboho's mask slipped. Fear flashed through his eyes, raw, real, unfiltered, but arrogance quickly reclaimed his expression. "That's ridiculous," Teboho spat. "No one would dare." "But someone is," Tabiso insisted. "They talked to other suppliers too. They mentioned video recordings, audio recordings. They mentioned your deals." Teboho took a threatening step forward. "Give me a name." "I can't," Tabiso said. "They'll come after me. I needed to warn you." "You needed to warn me," Teboho repeated, his voice rising. "Who told you to contact me?" "Who are you really?" Naledi leaned forward in pain and anticipation. This was working. Teboho's fury was rising along with his recklessness. "I'm not lying," Tabiso stammered convincingly. "The person gathering evidence. They've been watching you." "For days." Teboho's jaw tightened. "Watching me. Who?" Tabiso hesitated. I'm not sure, but they mentioned a woman." Naledi froze. She had timed this carefully, but hearing it aloud, the reference to herself sent a chill down her spine. "A woman," Teboho echoed. "What woman?" "I don't know her," Tabiso whispered. "Just that she looks poor, pregnant, vulnerable." For several seconds, silence twisted through the alley. Naledi saw it clearly the moment recognition dawned in Teboho's eyes. His face turned a shade darker, his fists clenched. "That beggar," he hissed. "I knew something was off about her." Naledi's heart pounded against her bruised ribs. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. She watched as Teboho's rage transformed into something sharper paranoia. "You're telling me she's been recording me," he demanded. "I don't know," Tabiso said, "but people are talking. They say she's working with someone powerful, someone inside the company." Teboho's expression twisted. Inside the company. Who? Thabiso let fear shake his voice. They didn't say. But they implied it might be someone close to the CEO. Naledi's fingers tightened around the edge of her shawl. She hated dragging Cabello into the trap, even indirectly, but Teboho needed to believe the threat came from above. Only then would he expose the full scope of his crimes. Teboho stepped forward, his voice barely controlled. Listen to me. If anyone is building a case against me, I need to know who they've spoken to. You will find out. Understand? I don't know if I can, Thabiso said. You will, Teboho snapped, or I'll make sure you regret ever stepping foot on these grounds. He turned away sharply, pacing. Naledi's camera captured every second. The agitation, the panic, the unraveling. But she needed more. She needed him to confess without being asked. Come on, she thought, willing him silently. Just a little more. Teboho spoke again, his voice a harsh whisper. No one can touch me. Nobody. Not after everything I've done to keep this company running. Thabiso remained silent. And if those idiots think they can expose me, Teboho continued. I've handled worse. I've silenced employees, pressured vendors, threatened interns. I know how to make people keep their mouths shut. Naledi felt her pulse quicken. That was it. A confession not fully explicit, but dangerously close. But then, Teboho turned abruptly. Wait, he said, pointing at Thabiso. How do I know you're not the one gathering evidence? Thabiso froze. What? No, sir, Or maybe. Teboho stepped closer. Maybe you're working with her. No, Teboho grabbed him by the collar. Naledi gasped silently. Her entire body tensed. Answer me, Teboho roared. Who sent you? Thabiso pulled back, fear flashing across his face, but he stayed in character. I swear, sir, I'm just trying to help. A sound broke through the tension. A small metallic clatter. Teboho's eyes snapped downward. The recording device had slipped from Thabiso's jacket pocket and hit the ground. Silence. For one horrifying second, no one moved. Then Teboho's expression transformed from suspicion to pure, violent rage. You betrayed me, he snarled. You were recording me. He lunged. Naledi didn't think. Despite the agony ripping through her ribs, she staggered to her feet and shouted, Stop! Her voice cracked through the air like lightning. Both men froze. Thabiso's breath caught. Teboho slowly turned toward her, eyes widening in disbelief as he recognized the trembling figure stepping into the light. You, he breathed. You. Naledi swallowed her pain and lifted her chin. Yes, she whispered. Me. And for the first time since she'd begun her investigation, she let him see the fire in her eyes. Cabello stood at the window of his office long before the sun had climbed fully into the sky. The city buzzed below him, cars weaving through streets, pedestrians beginning their day, but none of it reached him. His gaze remained fixed, unfocused, on a single thought that refused to release its hold, the woman in the footage. He could still see the exact moment Teboho's shoe connected with her side, the way her body collapsed, the way she clutched her belly in agony. He had watched the video so many times the night before that the images blurred together in his mind. Replaying every time he blinked, something inside him had twisted sickeningly with each replay. Something instinctive and unnervingly familiar. As if the pain he saw on that woman's face belonged to someone he knew, someone he loved. He had called Naledi's phone again that morning. Again, no answer. Her sister hadn't heard from her either. The silence gnawed at him, sharp and relentless. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Sir, DeTiro stepped inside cautiously. The rest of the security footage has been processed. He held out a tablet. There's something you need to see. Cabello took the device, bracing himself. He tapped the screen, and a new angle of the same footage appeared, a clearer view of the woman's face as she struggled on the pavement. His heart lurched. He froze. His grip tightened on the tablet until his knuckles turned white. No, he whispered, breath faltering, because now that he saw her without the blur, Without the shadows, he recognized her, the shape of her jaw, the curve of her cheek, the familiar softness around her eyes. It wasn't possible. It wasn't. But it was. "Sir," Ditiro asked quietly, "are you all right?" Cabello didn't answer at first. His mind had fractured into 1,000 pieces, each one piercing him with a new realization. The woman was his wife, Naledi. He sank into his chair as if the weight of the revelation had physically crushed him. "How?" he whispered. "Why would she?" The shock rippled through him with the force of a blow. He replayed the footage again, zooming in, analyzing each frame with the desperate hope that he was mistaken. But he wasn't. Naledi had disguised herself, and not just disguised, but placed herself in harm's way, subjected to humiliation and violence, and he hadn't known. He hadn't protected her. The guilt crashed into him like a tidal wave. Ditiro hesitated. "Sir, do you want me to call your wife?" "I've tried," Cabello said tightly. "She's not answering." The assistant lowered his gaze. "Should we alert the police?" Cabello shook his head sharply. "Not yet. First, I need to find her." His mind raced. Recalling every moment she had seemed distant over the past few weeks, he had assumed she was simply tired from her charity work. He hadn't asked enough questions, hadn't looked closely enough, hadn't noticed the quiet determination simmering beneath her gentle demeanor. He thought of her last smile, the softness in her voice the night before she disappeared, the way she had touched his arm lingering, almost as if she wanted to say something but couldn't. He had missed it, all of it. Ditiro shifted uncomfortably. "There's more," he said. "We found alerts from the security system this morning. Strange activity near the alleyway." Movements picked up before the cameras cut out for a few minutes. "Cut out." Cabello's voice sharpened. "Temporarily. Someone might have tampered with them." Cabello stood abruptly. "Show me." Minutes later, he strode into the security room, tension radiating from every step. The team pulled up the footage, grainy, fragmented clips showing figures in the alleyway. One appeared to be a man struggling with someone. Another, smaller, stood at a distance, partly hidden by a pillar. The timestamp was from less than an hour ago. Then the cameras flickered, static overtaking the screen. When they returned, the alley was empty. Cabello clenched his fists. Where did they go? "We're reviewing nearby street cameras," the head of security said. "But so far, nothing definitive." Cabello's heart thundered inside him. He knew deeply, instinctively, that Naledi was involved. This was no coincidence. She had been investigating something connected to Taboho. He inhaled sharply, the realization washing over him in waves. That man had kicked his wife. He had kicked Naledi. Rage ignited inside him, not the kind that burned hot and wild, but something colder, sharper, a blade forged from fury and fear. "I want every camera in the district checked," he ordered quietly. "Every alley, every street, every feed." "Yes, sir. And find Taboho," Cabello added, his voice tightening. "Now." As the team scrambled into action, Cabello returned to his office, marching with purpose. He needed answers. He needed a plan. But he also needed something far more urgent. To find his wife. He slammed his hand onto his desk, leaning heavily against it as the impact rattled across the room. "Why didn't you tell me, Naledi?" he whispered. His voice cracked for the first time. He sank into his chair, trembling with anger and anguish. Then his phone buzzed. A message. An unknown number. A single line. "If you want the truth, come to the alley behind your building. Now." Cabello's pulse quickened. He grabbed his jacket and bolted from his office before anyone could stop him. The alley behind the company building was quiet when he arrived. Too quiet. The early morning sun cast long shadows along the pavement, stretching toward him like fingers warning him away. Cabello walked cautiously, searching for any sign of movement. And then he heard it. A voice, pained, soft, familiar. Cabello. His heart stopped. Naledi. He spun toward the sound and found her leaning weakly against the wall, one arm wrapped around her stomach, her shawl slipping from her shoulders. Her bruises were visible even from a distance. Pain etched her face. Exhaustion clung to her like dust. but she was alive. He rushed to her, catching her just as her legs buckled. "Naledi." His voice was raw. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. "What happened? Why are you here? Why didn't you tell me?" A tear slid down her cheek. I had to find the truth. "You nearly died," he whispered. "You were hurt by my employee, by someone I trusted." She looked at him with equal parts sorrow and determination. "I couldn't involve you. If he suspected anyone close to you was watching him, he would have hidden everything." Cabello gritted his teeth. "I don't care about the evidence. I care about you. You should have told me." Naledi's voice trembled. "I was afraid you wouldn't believe me, or that it would put you in danger." He cupped her face gently, mindful of her injuries. "There is no danger I wouldn't face for you." For a moment, their foreheads touched, two souls finally aligned after weeks of secrecy and fear, but their fragile moment shattered instantly when a voice echoed through the alley. Well, Tebaho sneered. "Looks like the CEO finally found his beggar." Cabello turned sharply, pushing Naledi behind him. Tebaho stood at the alley entrance, rage twisting his expression. "You," Tebaho spat at Naledi. "You tricked me, you recorded me, and you attacked my wife," Cabello said, his voice low and dangerous. "You're finished." Tebaho laughed a sharp, unhinged sound. "I don't think so, because if I go down, I'm not going alone." Workers gathered at the alley entrance, drawn by the commotion. Some whispered, some recorded, and the undeniable truth settled over the scene like a storm about to break. This was no longer a secret. This was exposure. And Tebaho had just walked into the center of it. Naledi had never seen Cabello like this. His calm, composed demeanor, the quiet authority that marked him as a respected leader, had vanished. In its place was a cold, sharp fury she had only witnessed once before. Years ago, when someone threatened their younger niece during a family dispute, but even that paled in comparison to what she saw now. He stood between her and Tebaho, shoulders squared, jaw clenched so tightly the muscles trembled. It wasn't just anger burning through him, it was devastation, guilt, and an unspoken promise that anyone who harmed his wife would face consequences that would echo far beyond this alley. The wind in the narrow passage carried the murmurs of employees gathering near the entrance, their footsteps shuffling but hesitant. Whispers floated in the air like smoke. "Is that the CEO? What's happening? Is that the same beggar from earlier this week? No, look at her face. She looks familiar." Naledi felt her breath tighten. She didn't want her reveal to happen like this. She had prepared to step into the boardroom with evidence and composure not bruised, barely standing, exposed before a gathering crowd hungry for answers. "Naledi," Cabello whispered urgently, pulling her attention back to him. "You need to leave. Let me handle this." She shook her head weakly. "No, this is my fight too." Cabello's eyes glistened with anguish. "Your fight nearly got you killed." But before she could respond, Tebaho scoffed loudly, drawing every eye to him. "This is unbelievable," he sneered. "The CEO's wife, dressed like trash, pretending to be pregnant, lurking around the building for days. What kind of circus are you running, Cabello?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cabello stepped forward, voice low but lethal. "You should stop talking." "Why?" Tebaho smirked. "Because I've exposed your little family drama, or because your wife was spying on your own employees." "She was gathering evidence," Cabello said, his tone ablade. "Against you. Against your threats, your extortion, your violence." Tebaho's laugh was short, brittle. "You have no proof." Naledi stepped forward then, though her legs trembled. Thabiso, who had been watching from a few feet away, moved instinctively, ready to catch her if she fell. But Naledi lifted a hand, signaling him not to interfere. Her voice, when it came, was quiet but unwavering. "I have proof." She reached into the folds of her shawl and pulled out the small recording device. The lens was cracked, the casing smudged from the fall earlier, but the files inside were intact. She held it up for everyone to see. "This contains every threat you made, every bribe you accepted, Every vendor you bullied, every intern you terrorized. The color drained from Teboho's face. And that's not all, Naledi continued. She turned toward the group of employees who had gathered, pulling her shawl fully away and letting them see her for who she truly was. Gasps burst from the crowd. That's the CEO's wife. She's been here this whole time. She saw everything. Naledi's voice grew steadier with each breath. I came here because I heard whispers that something was rotting this company from within, that someone was using fear and greed to dismantle everything my husband built. I didn't know who was responsible, but I knew the truth would reveal itself when they faced someone powerless. She glanced at Teboho. And you showed me exactly who you are. Murmurs fluttered through the crowd, anger, realization, sorrow. Several employees lowered their heads, ashamed for staying silent. A few wiped away tears, relieved that their suffering was finally being acknowledged. But Teboho wasn't finished. This, he said bitterly, waving toward the crowd, is a joke. She's delusional. None of that will hold up in court. Really? Naledi raised an eyebrow. Because we also have. She nodded toward Tabiso, who stepped forward with the second recorder. This. Teboho's eyes widened. You dropped your guard this morning, Tabiso said, his voice steady. You said enough to incriminate yourself 10 times over. You set me up. Teboho roared. You incriminated yourself, Tabiso corrected. All I did was stand there. The crowd murmured in agreement. Cabello stepped toward Teboho with deliberate calmness. You threatened suppliers. You humiliated employees. You physically assaulted my wife. And you believed, truly believed, that your position made you untouchable. His voice hardened. You were wrong. Teboho's breathing quickened. He looked at the gathering crowd, the witnesses, at the CEO, his employer, at Naledi, the woman he had kicked, insulted, underestimated. Panic flickered across his face. He lunged, not toward Cabello, toward Naledi. It happened in a flash, but Cabello was faster. He intercepted Teboho mid-stride, gripping his arm with such force that the impact echoed against the brick walls. Workers gasped. Tabiso moved instinctively, helping pull Teboho back as he struggled with blind desperation. You don't get to touch her again, Cabello said through clenched teeth. Security officers sprinted into the alley, responding to the commotion. They held Teboho firmly, wrestling him away from the CEO. You're finished, Teboho screamed as they dragged him back. You hear me? Finished. I'll ruin you. His words dissolved into unintelligible rage as the security team forced him into restraints. Silence followed, thick, heavy, saturated with shock and release. When the last echo faded, Cabello turned back to his wife. Naledi was leaning against the wall, breath ragged, sweat beading across her forehead. The adrenaline that had held her upright slowly drained, leaving her pale and shaking. Cabello rushed to her side. Naledi, he whispered, cradling her face gently. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you put yourself through this? Tears glistened in her eyes. Because I knew you wouldn't let me do it. And it had to be me. They wouldn't show their true selves to you. Cabello exhaled deeply, pressing his forehead against hers. You're right, he murmured. But I should have protected you. I should have seen what was happening. You couldn't have known, she whispered. I hid it. Too well, he said, voice breaking. He pulled her into an embrace, careful not to touch her ribs too tightly. She melted into him with a soft sob. Around them, employees slowly dispersed, some shaken, some relieved, some inspired. A few approached quietly to express gratitude or apologies, but Cabello waved them off gently, focused entirely on the trembling woman in his arms. We're going home, he said firmly. You need medical attention, rest, safety. Everything else can wait. No, Naledi whispered, lifting her head. There's one more thing I need to do. Cabello frowned. What could possibly be left? She pulled away just enough to look him directly in the eyes. I need to show the board, she said softly, in person, before anyone tampers with evidence, before anyone tries to bury the truth. I need them to see the full picture from me. Cabello hesitated but then nodded. Then we'll do it together. Naledi smiled faintly, exhaustion stealing the strength from her body. And as Cabello guided her out of the alley, supported by Thabiso on her other side, she knew the hardest part of her journey was behind her. But the next part, the part where justice would finally rise, was just beginning. The boardroom had always been a place of polished calm, mahogany table, gleaming beneath warm lights, high-backed chairs arranged in perfect symmetry, and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. It was designed to command respect, to remind anyone who entered that decisions made here shaped the fate of hundreds. But today, the air felt different, tense, electrified, edges sharpened by anticipation. Board members whispered among themselves in low, anxious tones. News of a critical emergency meeting had spread rapidly throughout the upper ranks, but no one knew the details, only that it involved the CEO directly, and that he was furious. When Cabello entered the room, silence swept across the table like a gust of wind. His face was grim, his posture rigid, his aura simmering with a controlled anger that unsettled even the most seasoned executives. He walked to his seat without greeting anyone. But it wasn't him that stole their breaths. It was Naledi. She stepped into the boardroom behind him, slowly, carefully, supported by Thabiso. Her bruised cheek, her labored breaths, the faint tremor in her hands all painted a harrowing picture. Gasps rippled through the room as recognition dawned. That's the CEO's wife! What happened to her? Why does she look like that? Is she all right? Naledi paused at the threshold, gathering her strength before moving forward. Every step sent a dull ache radiating through her ribs, but she didn't falter. This was her moment. Her truth. Cabello pulled out a chair beside him, but Naledi placed a gentle hand on his arm. I need to stand, she whispered. Concern darkened his eyes. Naledi, you're injured. I need them to see me, she said. All of me. Reluctantly, he nodded. The room fell completely silent as she stepped forward. She faced the board 12 individuals whose decisions dictated the company's direction, reputation, and soul. Some she had known for years, others she had only met in passing at charity galas or end-of-year celebrations. But never like this. Never as the woman who had walked the company's grounds disguised as a powerless stranger. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was soft but carried with it an undeniable weight. Good morning. A murmur of acknowledgement flitted through the room. I'm sorry to appear before you like this, she continued, but circumstances leave me no choice. What I'm about to reveal concerns all of you. She reached into the folds of her shawl and placed a small device on the center of the table. The board members leaned forward, eyes drawn to it with a mixture of confusion and dread. This, Naledi said, is evidence. Evidence I gathered over the past week. The chairman of the board, an older man with silver hair and a firm voice, cleared his throat. Mrs. Malope, what sort of evidence? Naledi drew a slow, steady breath. Corruption. Silence washed over the room. She continued before anyone could respond. For months, vendors, interns, and junior employees have been living in fear. Contracts have been manipulated, payments extorted, threats made, all by one man. Cabello's fists tightened beneath the table. Naledi lifted her chin, eyes clear and unwavering. Teboho, gasps, echoed off the polished wood. He has accepted bribes. He has threatened to destroy livelihoods. He has bullied vulnerable employees until they cried in bathrooms. He has built an empire of fear inside this company. Board members exchanged horrified glances. One of them asked timidly, How do you know this? Naledi's expression hardened. Because I saw it. I lived it. She let those words settle before she continued. I disguised myself as a pregnant beggar and spent days outside this building, watching, recording, listening. He thought I was powerless, invisible, someone he could hurt without consequence. She didn't need to mention the bruises. Every eye in the room was already drawn to them. A female board member placed a trembling hand over her mouth. He attacked you, Naledi nodded once. He kicked me, hard enough that I lost consciousness hours later, and he walked away with pride. Cabello's jaw flexed, his eyes burning with a fire that made the board look away. Naledi tapped the device on the table. This contains the footage of the attack, the audio of his extortion, his threats, his admissions, and I have more, much more. Her gaze swept across the table, lingering on each face. This company stands for integrity, fairness, and dignity. But beneath its surface, something foul has been growing, and many people have suffered because they believed speaking up would only get them hurt. The chairman leaned forward, voice strained. Why didn't they come to us? Naledi shook her head. Because corruption isn't just about actions, it's about power. He made them believe he could ruin them, and until evidence surfaced, until someone exposed him, fear kept them silent. Her words rippled through the room, drawing nods of understanding mixed with guilt. One board member cleared his throat. Mrs. Malope, why did you take this upon yourself? Why not tell your husband? Naledi glanced at Cabello, her expression softening for a moment. Because he trusts people, sometimes too deeply. And I feared that if I told him before I had proof, he would confront Teboho prematurely and alert him, and then everything, the threats, the bribes, the suffering would remain hidden. She looked back at the board. So I acted, alone, because I believed this company deserved the truth, even if that truth came at a cost. Her last sentence hung in the air like a fragile thread. The chairman leaned back, absorbing her words. Mrs. Malope, may we see the evidence? Naledi nodded and pressed a button. The room filled with audio, Teboho's voice dripping with malice as he berated a trembling vendor. The crack of his threats, the venom in his insults, the smugness in his extortion. Then came his admission in the alley claiming to have silenced employees, pressured suppliers, manipulated contracts. The board members' faces shifted from shock to horror to fury. Naledi watched each reaction carefully. Some lowered their eyes in shame, others clenched their jaws, a few blinked back tears. But one thing was clear, they believed her. When the recording ended, silence filled the room again, thick, suffocating. Then the chairman spoke, voice trembling with restrained anger. This is monstrous. Another board member slammed his palm on the table. He used the company to build his own kingdom of threats. We cannot let this stand. He will be terminated immediately. He must face legal action. He must never work in this industry again. Cabello finally rose to his feet, his voice steady but dark. He will answer for everything. But before we proceed with legal steps, I want to hear from someone else. He turned toward Thabiso. Sir, Thabiso said quietly. You helped my wife, Cabello said. You risked yourself. You witnessed his corruption firsthand. Would you be willing to testify, to speak for those who were too afraid to? Thabiso hesitated only for a moment, then nodded firmly. Yes, sir, I'll speak. Cabello nodded in gratitude. Naledi felt a weight lift from her shoulders, not because the battle was over, but because she was no longer fighting it alone. The chairman addressed the room once more. Mrs. Malope, we cannot thank you enough for what you've done, but you've suffered greatly. Please allow us to arrange the best medical care for you. Naledi offered a tired smile. Thank you, but I'm only halfway done. There's still something I must do. What is that? The chairman asked. She lifted her chin. I want to speak to every employee publicly, to let them know they're safe now, that they can come forward. That silence is no longer their prison. The board exchanged glances of admiration. Cabello placed a protective arm around her shoulders. And I will stand beside her. Naledi met her husband's gaze, deep, warm, remorseful, and felt something settle in her chest. A new beginning, not just for her, not just for the company, but for every person who had been silenced. Justice had taken its first step. Tomorrow, it would take its next. The hours following the board meeting moved with the weight of inevitability. The moment the final recording ended, the decision had already been sealed. Teboho would be terminated, stripped of authority, and handed over to law enforcement. But decisions made in polished boardrooms meant nothing until they were enforced on the ground, until the guilty faced the consequences they had spent years evading. And that moment arrived faster than anyone expected. By late afternoon, word had spread across the company like wildfire. Rumors flew down hallways and across departments. Some wild, some accurate, some whispered with disbelief. Teboho is being investigated. No, he's already fired. I heard the CEO's wife was involved. They say she exposed him herself. He's going to be arrested. Employees clustered behind desks, lingered in doorways, peeked through windows. Their nervous energy hummed beneath the sterile office lights. They had lived under a shadow for so long that the thought of freedom felt almost unreal. In the center of this tension, security officers marched purposefully toward Teboho's office. He didn't see them at first. He was too busy pacing, raking his hands through his hair, muttering to himself like a cornered animal. They set me up. She tricked me. They won't dare fire me, not after everything I've done for this company. But when he lifted his head and saw the security team standing at his doorway, his face twisted into a mask of disbelief. "What do you want?" he snapped. The lead officer stepped forward. "Teboho Mahangu. Please step away from your desk." "For what?" Teboho barked. "You think you can come in here like this? I am senior management." "Former senior management," the officer corrected calmly. "You've been terminated, effective immediately. And per the CEO's directive, you are to be escorted off company grounds." Gasps erupted from nearby cubicles. Heads peeked over partitions. Someone silently reached for their phone to record, but a colleague quickly tugged it down, fear still ingrained in their muscles. "You can't fire me," Teboho roared. "You hear me? You can't. I built this place. Those suppliers, they needed me. Those interns, they were useless until I straightened them out. You people don't understand how things work." "Sir," the officer interrupted, voice steady. "Please cooperate. Cooperate. Cooperate." Teboho laughed, a manic, brittle sound that sent shivers down the hallway. "This is a mistake, a setup, a conspiracy." His voice cracked with desperation. "Who did this? Who betrayed me?" The officer exchanged a glance with another guard. "Sir, you need to calm down." But Teboho wasn't listening. He suddenly lunged for his desk drawer, searching for something. Anything, but before he could reach it, two officers grabbed him by the arms. "Let go!" he shouted, struggling violently. "Let me go! I didn't do anything wrong." His voice echoed through the floor, growing shrill with panic. Employees watched, some with fear, others with vindication, a few with quiet tears of relief. Justice was unfolding before their eyes, and with each passing second, the chains of fear that had bound them loosened. "I demand to speak to the CEO!" Teboho cried, his face flushed. "Do you hear me? I demand." "You'll have your chance," the officer said. "In court." They restrained him firmly, escorting him out of the office and toward the elevators. His shouts faded with each step. "This isn't over. You'll regret this. You'll all regret this." But everyone in the hallway knew the truth. It was over. For him. Meanwhile, Naledi sat quietly in the CEO's private lounge, wrapped in a soft blanket. Her breathing remained shallow. Every inhale trembled with the remnants of pain. But her eyes, though tired, held a glow of triumph, of moral clarity. Cabello sat beside her, worry creasing every line of his face. "You should be at a hospital," he said gently. "I will," Naledi murmured. "After this." He exhaled, torn between admiration and fear. "You don't have to see him being taken out." "I do," she whispered. "I need to see it with my own eyes, not for revenge, but for closure." A soft knock interrupted the moment. A young intern, the same one who had trembled in the hallway days before, stepped inside timidly. "Excuse me, Mr. Malape, Mrs. Malape." Her voice wavered. "They're bringing him through the lobby." Naledi placed a hand on the armrest, preparing to stand. Cabello immediately reached for her, his hands steady but trembling. "Are you sure?" he asked. She nodded. "I need to." Cabello helped her rise carefully, supporting almost all her weight as they made their way toward the central lobby. The company lobby, sleek marble floors, gold accents, towering glass windows had never felt so charged. Employees lined the mezzanine and ground floor, their murmurs hushed. Breath held collectively as security escorted Teboho toward the front doors. His wrists were restrained lightly enough to control him, not enough to cause harm. But the symbolism was undeniable. His reign was over when he caught sight of Naledi and Cabello approaching, his face contorted with a mix of rage, humiliation, and disbelief. "You," he spat, struggling against the guards. "You did this. You ruined everything." Naledi met his gaze steady, unwavering. "No, you did. You tricked me," he hissed. "Pretended to be weak to be someone else just to expose me." "I didn't pretend to be weak," Naledi said softly. "You just refused to see humanity when it wasn't wrapped in power and privilege." A murmur of agreement swept through the crowd. "You think you're righteous," Teboho barked. "You're nothing but a liar. And you hurt people," Naledi interrupted. "People who trusted this company to protect them. You used fear to build your position. But fear doesn't last forever." Teboho's eyes darted around the room, searching for allies, for anyone who might save him, but found none. Every face he met looked away in shame, anger, or relief. The officer tugged gently. "It's time." Teboho screamed incoherently as they dragged him toward the exit, but the moment the glass doors closed behind him, the building exhaled, a wave of silence, then a ripple of applause, hesitant at first, then growing, spreading across floors and hallways. Not applause of celebration, applause of release, of gratitude, of justice. Naledi leaned into Cabello, exhaustion finally overcoming her. He wrapped an arm around her waist, holding her firmly. "It's over," he whispered. She shook her head faintly. "Not yet." "What else remains?" Cabello asked softly. Naledi looked out at the employees who now stared at her with wide, grateful eyes. "They need to hear the truth," she said. "From me, from us. We need to rebuild trust, not just punish corruption." "And you want to speak today?" Cabello asked, eyes full of concern. "Yes," Naledi whispered. "Today." He exhaled slowly, then nodded. "I'll stand beside you." She smiled, tired, pained, but genuine. Like always, as they walked back toward the private lounge, arm in arm, each step slow but certain, Naledi felt the weight she'd carried for weeks, finally lifting. Justice had begun, but healing, real healing, was the next chapter, and she was ready to write it. The auditorium had never been this full. Employees crowded into every seat, lined the aisles, stood along the walls, even spilled into the hallway. Department heads whispered among themselves. Interns clutched notebooks with trembling hands, and long-burdened workers clasped each other's arms as if steadying themselves. The tension wasn't fear anymore, it was anticipation. A sense that something monumental was about to shift, something that would change the company forever. On stage, a podium stood beneath soft golden lights. A microphone waited, angled toward the empty space where a speaker would soon stand. The silence was expectant, heavy, and charged with emotion. When the side doors finally opened, a hush rippled through the crowd. Cabello entered first, composed but solemn, every step reflecting both authority and the weight of guilt he still carried. And behind him, supported by his arm, walking slowly but firmly, was Naledi. Gasps broke out immediately. Some employees covered their mouths, others pressed hands to their hearts. A few began crying before she even reached the stage. They had known a beggar had been attacked. They had heard whispers that she had been undercover. But seeing her like this, bruised, limping, wrapped in dignity rather than disguise, made the truth strike with full force. Naledi paused at the foot of the stage, gathering her breath as pain pulsed through her side. Cabello squeezed her hand gently. "I can speak for you," he murmured. Naledi shook her head. "No, they need to hear it from me." He nodded, pride and worry mixing in his eyes. Carefully, he guided her up the steps, placing her in front of the podium before stepping slightly behind her, not overshadowing her, but standing as her anchor. The room fell completely still. Naledi's gaze swept across the sea of faces, weary ones, hopeful ones, frightened ones, hardened ones. She could feel the collective ache in the room, the countless unspoken stories etched into quiet expressions. She inhaled slowly, wincing slightly, then spoke. "Thank you for being here." Her voice was soft at first, but the microphone carried it gently to every corner of the room. "I know many of you are confused. Some of you are afraid. Some of you have lived under fear for far too long." Several people lowered their eyes. Naledi continued, her tone strengthening. "What happened this week was not just the fall of one man. It was the exposure of something deeper. A culture that allowed fear to take root because it believed no one was watching." She paused. "But someone was watching, not just me. All of you." Whispers stirred. "I went undercover because I heard your pain," she said. "Your whispers reached me, even when you were too afraid to speak loudly. I knew something was wrong, something that couldn't be ignored." Her eyes glistened, not with weakness, but with empathy. "So I put on clothes that stripped me of my privilege. I hid my name, my position, my identity. I walked your halls as someone you were taught to overlook, and what I saw broke my heart." A few in the audience wiped tears. "I saw people too afraid to walk near a man who used his power to hurt. I saw interns crying where no one could see. I saw vendors trembling with envelopes they couldn't afford to give. I saw workers losing their joy, their confidence, their sense of safety." Naledi's voice caught, but she continued. "I became that woman he thought he could kick. He believed I was beneath him. He believed cruelty had no witnesses. He believed silence was permanent." Her voice strengthened with a quiet fury, but he was wrong. The employees in the audience shifted, some sat taller. Others held their breath. "I didn't come today to relive what he did," Naledi said. "I came because what happens next is more important than what happened before." She placed both hands on the podium to steady herself. "You deserve a workplace where fear is not a tool, where dignity is not something earned, but something honored, where voices are not silenced by threats, where leaders are protectors, not predators." Soft applause began, hesitant, emotional. Naledi held up a hand gently, and the applause quieted. "The board has acted. Teboho will face legal consequences for every life he harmed, for every threat, for every stolen shilling, for every tear shed in silence." A wave of relief spread through the room like warm light breaking through clouds. "But healing doesn't happen simply because a villain is removed," she continued softly. "Healing begins when we speak, when we refuse to hide, when we trust that we will be heard." She looked toward a group of interns near the front, the youngest, the most frightened, and offered them a reassuring smile. "So today, I want each of you to know this. You are safe." A quiet sob echoed near the back. "Not because I say so, but because now, we will work together to build structures that force the truth into the light. Because we will create policies that protect you, not punish you. Because we will listen to every voice, not just the loudest or the most powerful." She turned toward Cabello then, meeting his gaze. "And because your CEO understands that safeguarding this company means safeguarding you." Cabello stepped forward slightly, placing a hand on her shoulder in silent solidarity. Naledi returned her attention to the room. "I cannot undo the pain you endured, but I can promise that it mattered. Your suffering was not invisible, and your courage to continue coming to work every day, despite fear, despite despair, that courage is what gives this company hope." The auditorium brimmed with emotion, trembling breaths, soft crying, heads bowed in reflection. Naledi took another deep breath, her ribs protesting sharply. "There is something else I must say," she whispered. The room leaned closer. "When I went undercover, I didn't expect to find helpers, but someone stepped in. Someone held me when I collapsed. Someone carried me to safety. Someone stood beside me when it was dangerous." Her eyes found Thabiso near the side aisle. He stood there, humble, awkwardly shifting under the attention he hadn't expected. "This company needs more people like him," she said. "People who act not for reward, but for humanity." Thabiso looked down, cheeks warming. Naledi smiled softly. "Thank you." Then she stepped back from the podium, breath trembling, the weight of her words finally settling. For several heartbeats, no one moved. Then the applause began, soft at first, then louder. Then, rising into a wave that filled the entire auditorium, Naledi swayed slightly from exhaustion, and Cabello caught her instantly, holding her close as the applause washed over them. "You did it?" he whispered into her hair. "No," Naledi replied softly. "We did." As the clapping thundered around them, she felt something she hadn't felt since the ordeal began. Relief, safety, and the fragile, beautiful beginning of healing. The applause faded slowly, like waves pulling back from the shore, leaving behind a silence filled with warmth and unspoken gratitude. Naledi leaned into Cabello's support as he guided her carefully off the stage. The moment her feet reached the quiet hallway behind the auditorium doors, her strength wavered. The pain she had been holding back all morning surged, demanding attention. Cabello noticed instantly. "You need to sit," he murmured, concern tightening his voice. But Naledi shook her head faintly. "Not yet. There's still one more thing I need to do." He looked at her with disbelief. "You just addressed the entire company while injured. What could possibly be left?" She turned her chin toward the lobby entrance at the end of the hallway. "I need to see the people up close, not from a stage. I need them to know I'm not just a symbol standing behind a podium." Cabello exhaled, torn between admiration, frustration, and fear for her well-being. But he nodded. "Then I'll walk with you." He slipped an arm gently around her waist, supporting her weight as they stepped into the lobby. Word had spread quickly. Employees had gathered in groups, talking in hushed tones about what they had just witnessed. But when Naledi appeared, every conversation stopped. Heads turned, eyes widened. People cleared a path almost instinctively, as though parting for something sacred. One brave intern, the same young woman who had cried quietly in the hallway days before, stepped forward first. She approached slowly, hands trembling, her expression caught between gratitude and guilt. "Mrs. Malope, her voice cracked. "I'm so sorry you had to go through all of that." Naledi offered her a soft, tired smile. "You don't owe me an apology. None of you do." The intern swallowed hard. "I should have spoken up. We all should have." "You survived," Naledi replied gently, "and that matters more than courage spoken at the wrong time." Tears filled the intern's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered before stepping aside. A janitor, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, approached next. He pressed a hand over his heart. "I saw him threaten people," he said, voice trembling. "I wanted to help, but I have 3 children. I couldn't risk losing my job." Naledi reached for his hand, squeezing it lightly. "You protected your family. There is no shame in that." One by one, the employees came, not to seek forgiveness, but to release the weight they had carried. A vendor who had come to drop off supplies stepped forward cautiously. He wore the same fear-filled expression Naledi had seen so many times. "Ma'am," he stammered, I thought no one would ever believe me. That he would destroy my livelihood and get away with it. But he didn't," Naledi said softly, "because you were brave enough to endure, even when no one protected you. That strength is why the truth survived." The man bowed his head, eyes glistening. Employees from accounting, marketing, maintenance, HR, every department formed a loose semicircle around her. They said little, but their presence spoke volumes. Finally, Naledi felt the exhaustion pulling her downward like gravity. Cabello guided her to a bench near the large glass windows. She sank onto it, exhaling shakily as her ribs protested. Thabiso approached from the edge of the crowd. He stood quietly for a moment, unsure whether to come closer, but Naledi lifted a hand, beckoning him. "You were part of this victory," she said sincerely. "I couldn't have done it without you." Thabiso rubbed the back of his neck, embarrassed. "I only helped a little." "No," Naledi said firmly. You helped when it mattered, when no one else dared. Cabello stepped forward then, extending his hand. Thank you, he said, voice low but full of genuine respect. For protecting my wife, for believing her when others didn't. Thabiso shook his hand, overwhelmed. It was an honor, and, Cabello added, I'd like to offer you something. Thabiso blinked. Sir, a position, Cabello said. In community relations, your character is exactly what this company needs, moving forward someone who listens, someone who sees what others overlook. A ripple of surprise spread through the crowd. Thabiso's eyes widened. Sir, I don't know what to say. Say yes, Naledi whispered with a faint smile. Tears shimmered in his eyes as he nodded. Yes, thank you. The moment felt profound. The kind of moment that shifts, not just lives, but the culture of an entire place. But just as the relief settled, Naledi placed a hand gently over her stomach. She hesitated. Cabello noticed immediately. Naledi, are you in pain? No, she said softly. It's not that. Her eyes lifted to his full of a quiet sorrow, a quiet hope, a quiet truth. There's something I didn't tell you, she whispered. Cabello knelt beside her instantly, his worry intensifying. Anything. Tell me. Naledi took his hand, holding it over her abdomen. I wasn't pregnant when I started this investigation. She paused, letting the silence deepen. But now, I think I am. The world seemed to freeze. Cabello stared at her, breath caught, emotions crashing across his face. Shock, joy, fear, guilt, relief. You're pregnant, he whispered. Naledi nodded, tears welling. I wanted to tell you sooner, but then everything happened. And I didn't want you to worry, Relad. Cabello bowed his head, pressing her hand to his lips. Naledi, you went through all this while carrying our child. I didn't know at first, she whispered, and when I suspected, I couldn't stop. Too many people were suffering. I couldn't walk away. He looked up at her, eyes burning with equal parts admiration and heartache. You are extraordinary, he said, but no cause, no mission will ever matter more than you, or our child. Naledi smiled softly. I know, and now it's over. I'm done fighting. Cabello exhaled a shaky breath and pulled her gently into his embrace, careful not to touch her ribs, the lobby around them blurred with tears and astonished smiles. When they finally stood, supported by each other, the employees spontaneously began applauding again, not loud, not dramatic, but warm and heartfelt. The sound felt like a collective sigh of relief, a bound promise that they too would rebuild. Naledi turned one last time toward the employees. Be kind to one another, she said softly. Be brave. And remember, no matter how loud oppression shouts, truth will always find a way to speak. The lobby brightened with a sense of renewal, purpose, and hope. Cabello helped Naledi toward the elevator. Thabiso followed close behind, now part of a future he could never have imagined. And as the elevator doors closed, Naledi leaned her head against Cabello's shoulder, whispering with exhausted relief, It's finally over. But Cabello kissed her forehead gently and replied, No, my love, it's finally beginning, a new chapter, free from fear, built on truth, strengthened by courage. Their family's future, the company's rebirth, a story rewritten from pain into healing. In a world where power can be misused and silence can be forced, the true strength lies not in titles or influence, but in compassion, integrity, and courage. Naledi's journey reminds us that injustice often grows in the shadows of fear, and that even those who seem powerless can hold the key to unveiling truth. Her bravery showed that dignity cannot be stolen through cruelty, and that those who harm others eventually harm themselves. Justice is not merely the fall of the corrupt, but the rise of those who choose to do what is right, even when it is difficult. Healing begins when people stand together, when kindness replaces fear, and voices once silenced regain their power. If this story moved you, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. and remember to subscribe for more powerful tales of courage, morality, and redemption.